Sex is a very important part of marriage, and yet we know that a lot of couples are sexually unfulfilled or dissatisfied. Maybe one of them, maybe not both of them, maybe both of them. It's a big deal. Let's talk about that and see if we can help you find some solutions to make your sex life better. We can't cover it all in one session, but we can give you some good things to think about. Hi, I'm Dr. Joe Beam with MH International. Welcome to Relationship Radio in our 5th season here. Kimberly Holmes, our CEO, is with me. Kimberly knows that my PhD research had to do with the causes of and correlations between marital satisfaction and sexual satisfaction. Kimberly, we know that there's a consensus worldwide with marriage therapists, counselors, and et cetera, that those two things are related, right?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Why do you think?
Well, I think because of a couple of reasons. So first of all, sex is the most intimate form of love and should only happen, according to my beliefs and values, between a husband and a wife. And so when that's the only place that can occur, if it's not occurring, it can leave you open to a lot of temptation to seek it from somewhere else, which would not be good for the marriage. But also because it is the kind of highest form of showing that kind of love, it is if you feel like you are not receiving it, it can feel like you are being rejected, that you're not good enough. And it can cause problems on the marital side if that's happening. Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know actually which one happens first. We just know that they're definitely correlated. Mm-hmm. And so there have been a lot of studies, including mine, trying to find out, well, is it the marital satisfaction that affects the sexual satisfaction, or is it the sexual satisfaction that affects the marital satisfaction? And we found out, yes.
Yes.
We can't really say which one is the causality. We know that there's definitely a correlation and that they do rise and fall together. Now, Kimberly, sometimes in marriage, we talk about pushes and pulls. And we call pulls anything that you do that evokes positive emotions within the other person. We say pushes are those things you do that evoke negative emotions within the other person. And therefore, when we talk about pushes, we also talk about sometimes there are things that you don't do, and but the fact that you're not doing them, you're evoking negative emotions within the other person. And so I don't know how many times over the years I've heard either a husband or a wife, it's not always the guy, it can be one or the other, where that one of them is saying, I'm very unfulfilled in my marriage, and my spouse is evoking negative emotions within me because he or she is not wanting to be involved with me sexually. Can you see then that it can actually be a push because somebody doesn't do something?
Yeah, I can see how it can push you away for sure. Yes, absolutely. If there's not the sexual connection happening, then like I said before, it can lead one or both people to begin to push out of the marriage. I'm still trying to use the PUSH acronym, but I don't know that it's perfectly aligning here.
Well, the push, the fact that they're having these negative emotions may lead them to try to find something that's going to be evoking positive emotions when it comes to sex, which could be pornography. They get into that. And no, don't jump on me immediately and say, oh, you're saying that all porn addiction is the fault of the other spouse. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying if there is no sex in the marriage, that could lead a person, that push, that evoked negative emotion, could lead a person toward pornography, trying to find a positive emotion when it comes to sex. It could involve them beginning to do things on the internet, like chat sexually with other people, or it might lead them to actually having a full-fledged affair with somebody else. No, I'm not justifying any of those things. Please make sure you hear that. I'm not justifying it. But if that negative emotion is being evoked, then those possibilities now occur. Correct?
Yes, that's correct. I got stuck because I have a question that may take us off, but I think it's an important question. So at the rate at which people, especially men, but also women, are first seeing pornography, over 90% of people getting married now, at least the man, has already watched pornography. You said, though, they may begin to watch it if negative emotions begin in the marriage. What if they're already watching it?
Okay, then they may go back to it. That's a good
What if
point.
they're already watching it? Like, what if it's part of their normal sex life?
That becomes a difficulty. right there. By the way, 40% of porn users are female. 40%. And so it's not just a masculine or a male thing. It is more common in men, but it's also very common in women. And what is happening when that occurs is that people are getting wired in such a way that it can't possibly be fulfilled. A few years ago in the World Congress of Sexual Health, when they were having a meeting in Sydney, Australia, I was there, and one of the lecturers in that worldwide Congress of sexual students, people who are sexologists, I guess I should say, they were talking about the fact that the sexual expectations that are being set up by pornography are going to make it where that marriage at some point will cease to exist. And their logic was this, because they're being programmed to think that you should have several sexual partners, and that whatever sexual partner you have should be ready at any moment, anytime, anywhere to do anything that you want and to be excited about it at the same time, that there's no way that is going to be fulfilled in celibate, not celibate.
Monogamous.
Monogamous. I went bad on the word there. But a monogamous relationship is never going to be able to fulfill that. And therefore, they were arguing that if we continue to educate the world, and in the world, the number one method of sex education is internet pornography, that eventually is going to destroy marriage. Now, I'm very pro-marriage. And I sat there thinking, I can't argue against that.
You know what? I heard two people having a conversation about this on a podcast a couple months ago, and they have said that now, because of pornography, people are becoming, they didn't say asexual, but basically because people are lacking connection with others, they're not dating as much, they're not having the in-person encounters as much, and pornography is so rampant that person-to-person sex is going to decrease. So we're not even talking about marriage. Like, they can't even get to the point of marriage, and they're so scared to approach someone of the opposite sex in order to ask them out or have a real relationship, that that's a new concern about the future.
And that's becoming more and more evident as we go along.
That is strange.
And if you start looking at all the problems that come with that, I mean, we could spend 10 programs just on pornography. But for example, if a male or a female is actually using pornography to find some degree of sexual satisfaction by masturbation, typically it actually speeds up the time between the beginning of eroticism and the orgasm. Therefore, a number of men in marriages are having trouble with premature ejaculation because they trained themselves by watching porn and actually having their orgasms very quickly, and now they're trying to rewire their brains and do it differently. Then at the same time, they start comparing their spouses, and they'll compare, for example, men will compare the wives, but the wives also wind up comparing the men. Are you as skilled as those people I'm watching on that screen? Are you as endowed as the people I'm watching on those screen? Are you as young as the people on those screen? And by the way, every single day, you get older. Those people on that picture or in that movie never get a day older in that picture or on that movie. And so, yes, it's causing a lot of sexual dysfunction. And therefore, there are some people who will just skip having sex with their partners because it can be so much faster, and they have trained themselves to need so much different kind of stimulation that's not going to happen with just one person. And then we find that sometimes the spouse who discovers that my spouse is either looking at porn or sexually chatting on the internet or having an affair, I don't want to have any sex with that person. Or my spouse, even if he or she is not involved in all that other stuff, my spouse has such a bad relationship with me, I don't want to make love to that person. But at the same time, the lack of fulfilling sex is still contributing in negative ways to all of this. So I'm not blaming it on this spouse, the one that's not having sex, although that is still affecting all these other things, the fact that the sex is not happening. I'm not making that so confused that it doesn't make sense.
No. A minute ago, I was going to say, so at its core, it's still all about fearing rejection, but I don't know that it's all at its core about fearing rejection. But I do think that there are a lot of different ways people have different fears. Fear that I'm not going to be good enough. Fear that Or for people who, as we were talking about before we started recording, for people who've had past sexual trauma, fear that it's going to bring up those thoughts or those feelings. Like, it seems like what's prohibiting people from having healthy sex life is a fear in some way of some kind.
Yes. When you start thinking about sexual dysfunctions, and that's a broad topic, there can be physiological dysfunction, such as erectile, where a man cannot have an erection, an erectile dysfunction. It can be something like a female may have vaginismus, which means that the muscles inside the vagina just clamp shut, and therefore penetration cannot occur. I mean, there's all kinds of physiological things that sometimes have to be dealt with. But as you said, there's all kinds of emotional and mental things, like I was molested when I was 4, and to this day I'm terrified by it. Even if the person who was molested when they first became an adolescent actually may have acted out sexually because they were programmed to think my worth and value has to do with sex, and then later come to regret all that, and then they wind up getting married and don't want to have sex at all. All of those things need professional help, physiologically. And remember that medical doctors are just like the rest of us. Some of them are very open to talking about sexual things. Some of them get embarrassed about it, and some are so uptight they don't want to talk about it at all. So don't assume that just because a physician is well-trained that he or she will talk the way that you need to talk about sex. But sometimes you need a physician. Sometimes you need a counselor or therapist who can help you deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder or syndrome that you have, the sexual abuse that occurred when you were a child, and et cetera. And if you're thinking, well, if I just don't have any sex anymore ever, I don't have to worry about those things. But now we're back to the original problem. If your spouse is a sexual being and wants sexual fulfillment, and you don't go deal with that problem, finding the help, then your spouse is going to feeling rejected. Therefore, your spouse may wind up doing something he or she shouldn't be doing. Am I justifying them doing that? No, I'm not. I'm not justifying that. But let's face reality. If people are not being fulfilled in an area where they want to be fulfilled, some become stoic and are just able to handle it. Many are not, and are going to find some kind of outlet for that. So did I sound like a politician talking out of both sides of my mouth here?
I don't think you've talked about out of both sides of your mouth yet.
Yet implying.
Maybe there's time.
Well, you summarize what I've been trying to say. Let's see if I'm communicating.
Well, yes. So the topic of sexual rejection, there's a subtopic, which is kind of the foundational topic, which is, well, what is happening that's leading this to happen? We need to address that first.
Yes.
So whether it's a physiological or psychological or combination of the two issue, if a person is having that, whether it's a sexual dysfunction or past trauma, things like that, it needs to be dealt with on a medical or licensed professional level, some combination of the two, likely. But if it's a relationship issue that is leading to the lack of sex, that needs to be dealt with as well. So another thing you kept saying is if your spouse is a sexual being, we're not going to get into the whole asexual thing happening now. We're assuming that two people in a marriage are sexual beings, and one of them at least has a need for the sexual connection between husband and a wife. So from that point, you're saying there's a lot of things happening, get to the core issue. But what if you're the spouse wanting more sex and your spouse is the one suffering physiologically or psychologically and does not want to get help?
Then you're in a world of hurt because your sexual needs will not just disappear. I remember talking to a couple. It was in West Virginia several years ago where I was doing a seminar, and a couple pulled me aside, and basically she said, he doesn't want to have sex with me. I'm 35 years old. I'm a sexual being. And he said, look, I'm the man. If I don't want sex, then you don't need sex. And therefore, he was going to do nothing about it whatsoever. Wow. And she is absolutely miserable in that situation. Now, if you're a religious person, for example, let's say you're a Christian. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, if you're a Christian, beginning of verse 2, it says that part of your marital obligation is to fulfill your spouse sexually. Therefore, if you're a religious person, particularly in Christianity, you would look at that and go, well, even God's telling me to go get this fixed, that I should do something about this for the sake of my spouse. And if you choose not to, the temptations that your spouse faces can become overwhelming. Still not justifying people doing anything wrong. But it's a matter of if you don't go get the help you need, and it won't happen overnight, it may take a while, but if you don't find the help you need, then basically you're looking at your spouse and saying, my issue is my issue to the point where I'm not thinking about what you need. And in any part of marriage, especially sex, but in any part of marriage, that's a message to the other person basically saying, I don't care.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Because if you're going to shut that off for your spouse, you're basically telling them, go, not only I don't care about you, but you're going to have to find that somewhere else. Like that fulfillment you're looking for is not going to come from me. And you're not overtly saying it, but the inference from that, is to go somewhere else. Now, I do want to say, just because we have to double underline this, we also do not promote using that scripture as a way to try and guilt your spouse to have sex with you or to do,
right.
I mean, this is a very sensitive subject all around, and people can take certain things out of context. And we just want to be sure that we're upright, that we do believe sex is an important part of marriage. Well, I'll say what I will say from my point of view. Sex is an important part of marriage, but even still, a wife or a husband at any point for any reason on any day may decide they don't want to have sex that day.
That's correct.
And you should not force them to.
Ever
in
any
marriage.
situation. I remember in one workshop we were doing one time, this was years and years ago, a guy spoke up. This guy was just mean, and everybody in the whole workshop had gotten to where they didn't like him. And he said, if my wife would just obey the Bible and have sex with me, we would have no problems. And every woman in the room was thinking, none of us would have sex with you. You're a jerk.
Not a chance.
Yeah, and therefore he was the problem, not her.
For sure.
Okay. And so sometimes, Kimberly, very quickly, we don't have time to answer this in depth, but people say, okay, if we're having trouble, should I continue to sleep with my spouse? Let me give you the pros and cons. The pros are oxytocin is released, which is a good thing. The pros are you get to fulfill your needs, and you can actually help your spouse fulfill his or her needs. Now, there are more pros than that, but I'll just stop with those. What are the cons? If you think that that's going to manipulate your spouse into staying, it's going to work against you because of the things you're going to do, the things you're going to feel, and the anger you're going to have at what point when you realize that's not going to cause my spouse to stay in and of itself. Another thing is, if you think that's giving you hope that your spouse really is always going to be there and never going to leave you, and even in trouble, I'm having sex with him or her, and that means they're never going to leave, that's giving you false hope. We actually, if you go to our YouTube channel, you can find like a 10 or 15 minute video about that, the pros and cons of having sex with a spouse that you're separated from or having trouble with. Now, last thing, Kimberly. So what if I'm not going to force my spouse to have sex with me, but I wind up becoming the person pleading and begging for sex? What happens then?
Well, I feel like we're opening a Pandora's box of issues and deep conversations and subjects to be talked about. It's important to, I believe, if you're having to beg your spouse, I believe it's important to first just have a conversation of here's why this is important to me. What's going on with you? And not from a guilt or shame place, but just tell me where you are so that you can begin to make a plan, hopefully together, on how to move forward. So if your spouse comes to you and says, I never told you, but I was molested when I was 12 years old and things like that. Okay. It's going to bring a level of empathy into that conversation. And then you can work together on, let's make a plan to get you help for that. Right. So having the conversation first and foremost, being supportive in that. And, they may say something like, I don't have a desire. Especially women, low desire or low libido, maybe they're going through menopause. I mean, there's so many different things that could be leading to it that it's worth having the conversation first.
Yes. And if you can't work it out on your own, I suggest two different things. One is we have a toolkit that's 12 videos long, 7.5 hours videos, along with PDFs that you fill out, think things through, and will lead you into these conversations. And you can find that at marriagehelper.com/spark. That's marriagehelper.com/spark. And you can get that, work through it together at your leisure, at whatever pace you wish. But those PDFs you fill out and those conversations you have are reported. If it's something much beyond that, then I would recommend you find a sex therapist. But listen, if you're going to find a sex therapist, talk to them for 5 minutes before you ever go see them on the phone, do a little pre-call, and find out if they're going to respect your beliefs and values, operate within your beliefs and values. And sometimes sex therapists can be great help there. We'd love to help you with our kit. And Kimberly, sometimes it's just the relationship. Mm-hmm. And how can we help that?
Yes. The 3-day workshop that we have not only helps couples to turn around their marriage, but it actually, on one study that was conducted on the workshop, showed that there was I believe it was in the 60%, 68, 67% increase in sexual satisfaction 90 days after the workshop, as well as the relationship satisfaction that occurred.
Maybe around 59, 60, something like that. It was high.
It was high.
That within 90 days.
It was statistically significant.
Very significant.
Yes.
It really was. Just from fixing the relationship.
Right.
And some of that was because of the fact that now they knew how to talk with each other.
If you want more information about the workshop, go to marriagehelper.com/workshop.
Well, as Kimberly said, this is a big topic, and there are so many things. We're not trying to cause you more problems. We really aren't. We want to help you with a relationship. And thank you for being with us in this episode of Relationship Radio, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.